The elderly woman stood quietly behind the velvet rope, clutching a faded canvas bag against her chest, while decorated officers and honored guests streamed into the military ceremony. Her coat was old, her shoes worn, and her silver hair danced in the cold morning wind. When she politely asked if she could step closer to the memorial, the young captain barely looked at her. With a sharp gesture, he told her to remain behind the barrier. A few people noticed. Most simply looked away. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. The woman lowered her eyes without arguing. She had known rejection before. She had lived through years when silence carried more weight than words. So she stepped back, folded her trembling hands, and waited. The captain believed he was simply following protocol. The event honored military heroes, and security had been strict all morning. Every guest had a place. Every movement had a schedule. Rules existed for a reason, and he had spent his career believing discipline always came before emotion. But he never asked why the woman had come. The ceremony began beneath a gray autumn sky. Flags moved gently in the wind while a military band filled the air with slow, solemn music. Families stood shoulder to shoulder. Veterans adjusted old medals pinned carefully onto aging jackets. Children whispered questions their parents struggled to answer. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly veteran in a wheelchair slowly rolled toward the woman. His hands shook as he looked at her face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the veteran struggled to his feet. Every conversation stopped. He raised his hand into a perfect salute. Another veteran noticed. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of aging soldiers, men whose uniforms carried decades of sacrifice, turned toward the quiet woman instead of the stage. One by one, they stood as straight as their tired bodies allowed and saluted her with absolute respect. Confused whispers swept through the crowd. Even the captain froze. Who was she? The master of ceremonies lowered his notes, watching in complete disbelief as nearly every veteran present faced the elderly woman rather than the podium prepared for generals and politicians. The silence became almost unbearable. Finally, one retired colonel stepped forward. His voice trembled. Many years ago, he said, most of us would not be standing here without her. The crowd listened. During one brutal winter conflict decades earlier, the woman had been a volunteer nurse stationed inside a temporary field hospital hidden near the front lines. Day after day, she worked without sleep, carrying wounded soldiers through collapsing buildings, treating injuries with almost no medicine, and refusing evacuation whenever others still needed help. When enemy fire destroyed the medical camp, she had returned into the flames again. And again, and again. She carried out 17 wounded soldiers before the roof finally collapsed. Several of those men now stood among the veterans, saluting her. One of them quietly wiped tears from his eyes. I owe my grandchildren, he whispered to that woman. The captain felt his stomach tighten. He remembered dismissing her only minutes earlier, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had looked ordinary. For the first time in years, the weight of his own judgment felt heavier than the medals on his uniform. Without saying a word, he walked across the memorial grounds toward her. The crowd watched every step. When he reached her, he removed his cap. Then he stood perfectly still. His salute was slow, precise, unshakably sincere. I am sorry, he said softly enough that only those nearby could hear. I saw an elderly woman. I should have looked harder. She smiled with remarkable gentleness. You were protecting people, she answered. Never apologize for serving with honesty. Just remember, sometimes history arrives wearing ordinary clothes. The captain's eyes filled with quiet emotion. He offered his arm. Together, they walked through the barrier he had refused to let her cross. No one spoke. No one needed to. The veterans remained saluting until she reached the memorial stone, where she gently placed a single white flower beside the engraved names of friends she had never forgotten. In that silent moment, everyone understood that true heroes rarely announce themselves. They simply carry their courage for a lifetime, expecting nothing in return. Because kindness, sacrifice, and humility never disappear. They simply wait for the moment the world is finally ready to recognize them. As the wind carried fallen leaves across the memorial, the woman stood exactly where she had always belonged, not at the edge of history, but quietly at its heart. If this story touched you, Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more unforgettable stories of courage and compassion. And remember this: the greatest heroes are often the ones no one notices, until the truth makes the whole world stand.